I received the assignment on a dreary Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low, suffocating the city beneath a blanket of gray. My editor, a grizzled man who had seen more than his share of the bizarre, handed me a thin folder with an unusual glint in his eye. Inside were only a few pages, newspaper clippings, police reports, and a grainy photograph of a dense forest. The name Whisperers Sect was scrawled in red ink across the top. "Ever heard of them?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of whiskey and cheap cigars. I hadn't. But as I flipped through the pages, a cold dread began to coil in my gut. The stories were vague: disappearances, unexplained phenomena, whispers of a cult operating out in the forest beyond a forgotten town. No one could, or would, say much more. It was all just fragments, hints of something lurking in the shadows. "They say they control people," my editor added, almost as an afterthought. "Through whispers." I raised an eyebrow, ready to dismiss it as nonsense, but something about the way he said it, the way his gaze seemed to pierce through me, made me pause. "So, what's the angle?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Find out if there's any truth to it. If there is, it's the kind of story that could make your career. If not, well..." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. I nodded, more out of habit than agreement. I had covered my fair share of strange stories, but this felt different. As I left his office, the folder tucked under my arm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far more sinister than just another assignment. The town was as unwelcoming as the forest that loomed behind it. It was one of those places that seemed to have forgotten time, where the paint peeled from weathered wooden houses and the roads were more potholes than pavement. As I drove in, the locals watched with a mix of suspicion and unease, their eyes narrowing as my car crawled down the main street. There was something in their stares, something more than just the usual wariness of outsiders. It was fear, palpable, thick, and suffocating. I checked into the only motel in town, a crumbling relic from the 1960s that hadn't seen a renovation since. The clerk at the desk barely spoke, handing me the key with a shaking hand. His eyes darted nervously to the window, as if expecting something, or someone, to burst in at any moment. After dropping my bags in the room, I headed to the local diner. It was the kind of place that smelled of burnt coffee and grease, with a jukebox in the corner that hadn't played a tune in years. The few patrons inside fell silent as I walked in, their conversations dying in their throats, as they stared at me. I slid into a booth and ordered a coffee, hoping to strike up a conversation, but no one seemed eager to talk. It wasn't until an old man in a frayed flannel shirt shuffled over to my table that I got anything more than monosyllabic grunts. He didn't sit, just stood there, looming over me with a look that bordered on desperation. "You're here about the forest, aren't you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the diner's old fridge. I nodded slowly, my heart beginning to race. "What do you know about it?" His eyes flicked nervously around the room before he spoke again, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't go out there. People who do, they don't come back the same. If they come back at all." Before I could ask him anything more, the old man turned and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: the fear in this town was real, and it had deep roots, burrowed into the very soul of the place. And whatever lay waiting in that forest, it was something the townspeople didn't dare face. Nightfall came swiftly, as if the sun had been snuffed out rather than set. The forest, dark and brooding on the horizon, seemed to beckon with an almost sentient pull. I knew I shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed to stay within the relative safety of the town, to abandon this madness and head back to the city where things like this belonged only in late-night stories told over too many drinks. But the lure of the unknown, the need to see what was hidden in the shadows, was too strong. I packed my camera, a notebook, and a flashlight, the beam of which felt pathetically weak against the encroaching darkness. The town was eerily quiet as I made my way to the edge, where the road turned to dirt and the trees began to close in, their branches twisted and gnarled like the hands of the damned reaching out for salvation. As I stepped into the forest, the air grew colder, heavy with a dampness that clung to my skin. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of something unseen in the underbrush. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to fade away, swallowed by the night. I kept moving, driven by the faint glow of firelight flickering through the trees ahead. It was dim, almost ghostly, but unmistakable. I forced my way through the undergrowth, branches scraping against my face and arms, until I reached a small clearing. There, in the center, stood a group of figures cloaked in black robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They circled around a fire, the flames casting long, twisted shadows that danced across the ground. I held my breath, inching closer, desperate to stay hidden. The figures began to chant, their voices low and rhythmic, rising and falling in a language I couldn't comprehend. But it was the whispers that unnerved me the most, soft, insidious murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The sounds slithered into my ears, curling around my mind like a snake, squeezing until my thoughts grew hazy and unfocused. I fought the urge to step forward, to join them in their ritual. My muscles tensed, every fiber of my being screaming for me to flee, but I couldn't move. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with dark promises and terrible commands. Then, one of the figures turned, and though I couldn't see his eyes beneath the hood, I knew he had spotted me. The chanting stopped, and for a moment, the forest was deathly silent. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reverberating in my skull as I braced for what was to come. But instead of rushing towards me, the figure simply raised a hand beckoning. The whispers surged, and I felt my body betray me as I took a step forward, then another, drawn towards the fire and the dark figures that waited there. My legs moved of their own accord, each step dragging me closer to the circle of robed figures. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, a storm of voices that gnawed at my sanity. I tried to resist, to pull back, but it was like fighting against a tide that threatened to sweep me away. As I crossed the threshold into the clearing, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with the scent of burning herbs and something far more acrid. The figures stood motionless, their faces hidden, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, calculating, and ancient. The fire between us crackled and spat, casting their shadows in grotesque shapes that writhed and twisted in the flickering light. Then, the leader of the group stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his presence more commanding, more oppressive. With a slow, deliberate motion, he lowered his hood. His face was pale, almost waxy, with eyes that seemed too dark, like twin voids where a soul should be. He opened his mouth, and the whispers surged in a chaotic crescendo. "Welcome," he said, though the word didn't seem to come from his lips but from the very air around us, seeping into my mind like a poison. "You've come a long way to find us, haven't you?" I couldn't respond. My throat was dry, my voice lost somewhere in the sea of whispers that drowned my thoughts. I nodded, the movement stiff and unnatural, as if my body no longer belonged to me. The leader smiled, a slow, creeping grin that sent ice down my spine. "You've seen our ritual. You've heard the whispers. Now you must understand their power." He gestured with one hand, and the others began to chant again, their voices melding into a single, hypnotic hum. The whispers grew louder, sharper, digging into my mind, twisting my thoughts until I could barely distinguish them from my own. "Listen," the leader commanded, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "Feel the truth in the whispers. They are more than sound, they are life, they are death, they are control." As he spoke, I felt something shift inside me, a dark presence wrapping around my consciousness like a parasite. The whispers burrowed deeper, and with each word, I felt my will weakening, my thoughts no longer my own. I could feel the presence growing stronger, feeding off my fear, my doubts, my very essence. "You are ours now," the leader intoned, his voice echoing inside my skull. "You will obey, you will serve, and you will spread the whispers." For a moment, I teetered on the edge of oblivion, ready to give in, to let the whispers take me. But then, with a surge of desperation, I wrenched myself free, the effort nearly tearing me apart. I stumbled back, gasping for breath, the whispers still clawing at the edges of my mind. The leader's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold disdain. You think you can escape? The whispers are inside you now. They will follow you, haunt you, until you are one of us. Panic seized me, and I turned, bolting into the forest. The trees closed in around me, the branches scratching and tearing at my clothes as I fled. But no matter how fast I ran, I could still hear them. The whispers, faint but persistent, a dark promise that echoed in the deepest corners of my mind. I ran through the forest, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the trees blurring into dark smudges as I pushed myself faster, further away from the clearing, from the whispers. But they followed me, relentless, seeping into every corner of my mind. No matter how far I got, they were there, soft, insidious, pulling at my thoughts, trying to drag me back. By the time I stumbled out of the forest, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the ground, trembling, soaked in sweat. The town was eerily silent, the streets deserted, as if everyone knew better than to be awake at this hour. But the whispers were louder than ever, a constant murmur at the edge of my consciousness, gnawing at my sanity. I made my way back to the motel in a daze, my body moving on autopilot. The clerk was gone, and the place was as empty as the streets outside. I locked myself in my room, hoping that the flimsy door and thin walls would somehow keep the whispers at bay. But they were inside me now, coiling around my mind, tightening their grip with every passing moment. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My face was pale, gaunt, and my eyes, there was something different about them. A darkness, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. I barely recognized myself. The first compulsion hit me like a tidal wave, an overwhelming urge to hurt, to destroy, to lash out at something, anything. I gripped the edge of the bed, my knuckles white, trying to resist, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, feeding off my weakness. My hands began to shake, and before I knew it, I had thrown the lamp across the room, shattering it against the wall. The satisfaction was immediate, like a rush of cold water over my burning mind. But it didn't last. The whispers wanted more. They demanded more. I fought them, locking myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink as I stared into the mirror. But my reflection was a stranger now, twisted and malevolent, a cruel smile playing at the corners of my mouth. I could see the whispers behind my eyes, feel them writhing beneath my skin, waiting to break free. Hours passed in a blur of violence and fear. I smashed furniture, tore at the walls, anything to try and quiet the whispers, to regain control. But it was never enough. Each act of destruction only fed them, made them stronger. And then came the final compulsion, the one I had been dreading. A voice, clear and sharp, cutting through the fog of whispers in my mind. Take the knife. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The command was undeniable, an iron weight pressing down on my mind. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the kitchen drawer, pulling out the knife. The cold steel gleamed in the dim light, and for a moment, I saw my own terrified reflection in the blade. Do it, the voice urged, sweet and coaxing, like a lover's whisper in my ear. End the suffering. Free yourself. I raised the knife, my hand trembling. The whispers surged, a roaring tide that drowned out everything else. I closed my eyes, trying to summon the last of my willpower, trying to fight back. But the knife pressed closer, the cold metal brushing against my skin. And then, just as I was about to give in, something snapped inside me. A raw, primal instinct, a refusal to let the whispers win. I threw the knife across the room, the blade clattering against the floor as I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. The whispers didn't stop. But they recoiled, just slightly, as if I had managed, for a brief moment, to push them back. But I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before they took over completely. Before I lost whatever shred of humanity I had left. Desperation clawed at me as the whispers ebbed and flowed, an unrelenting tide that threatened to drown me. I knew I couldn't survive much longer like this. I needed answers, a way to break free before the whispers consumed me entirely. And there was only one place to find them. The cult. I gathered what little courage I had left, and forced myself out of the motel room. The morning light was harsh, almost blinding, but it felt like a lifeline, something real to cling to amidst the growing chaos in my mind. I knew where I had to go. The leader, the man with the voids for eyes, held the answers I needed, and I would drag them out of him, even if it killed me. The forest seemed different in the daylight, less menacing but still oppressive, as if the trees themselves remembered the horrors they had witnessed. The path back to the clearing was burned into my memory, each step filled with dread. But I kept moving, the whispers driving me forward now, pulling me towards their source. When I reached the clearing, it was empty. The fire had long since died out, leaving behind only cold ashes and a faint, lingering scent of smoke. For a moment I thought they were gone, that I had missed my chance. But then I felt it, a presence behind me, dark and looming. I turned slowly, and there he was, the leader, standing at the edge of the clearing. His hood was pulled low, casting a shadow over his face, but I could still see those eyes, black voids that seemed to draw in the light around them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me with an almost predatory calm. "I want answers," I demanded, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound strong. "How do I stop this? How do I get them out of my head?" The leader tilted his head slightly, as if considering my question. Then he spoke, and the whispers surged again, a low hum that reverberated through the clearing. "There is no escape," he said, his voice a cold echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The whispers are a part of you now. They have seen into the darkest corners of your mind, found the cracks, the weaknesses. You cannot silence them. You can only obey." "No!" I shouted, backing away. "There has to be a way. I won't let them take me." The leader's smile was slow, creeping across his face like a shadow. "You already belong to us. You've seen what happens when you resist. The violence, the madness, it's only the beginning. The more you fight, the stronger they become. The only way to end the suffering is to surrender, to let go." His words cut deep, the truth of them sinking into my bones. The more I had resisted, the worse it had gotten. And yet, the thought of surrendering, of giving in completely, filled me with a cold, paralyzing terror. "There's another way," I insisted, though the words felt hollow. "There has to be." The leader stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, suffocating. "You still don't understand, do you? The whispers are not just voices. They are the will of something far greater than you can comprehend. They are the darkness that exists in every human soul, given form and purpose. They do not destroy, they reveal." As he spoke, the whispers in my head grew clearer, sharper, as if they were trying to show me something, to pull back the veil on a truth I had been too afraid to see. And then, in a sudden, horrifying moment of clarity, I understood. The whispers weren't an external force. They were my own thoughts, twisted and amplified, the darkest parts of my psyche given voice by the cult. They had found the fear, the anger, the guilt buried deep within me, and they had fed on it, growing stronger with every suppressed emotion, every unspoken doubt. "There is no escape," the leader repeated, his voice a soft, insidious whisper. "You are already one of us." The realization hit me like a physical blow, the ground seeming to tilt beneath my feet. The whispers were me. They had always been me, and there was no running from myself. I stood there, trembling, as the truth seeped into every corner of my mind, cold and unyielding. The whispers, they weren't some external force to be banished or silenced. They were a part of me, born from the darkest recesses of my soul, given power by the cult and now entwined with my very being. The leader watched me, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. He could see it in my eyes, the realization, the despair. The whispers had won. I had been fighting myself all along, and in doing so, I had only made them stronger. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. A flicker of defiance sparked within me, a desperate need to cling to whatever shreds of humanity I had left. If I was to be consumed by the darkness, it would not be without a fight. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged at the leader, my hands reaching for his throat. But he didn't resist. He didn't even flinch. His cold, dark eyes met mine, And in that instant, the whispers surged with a force so powerful it brought me to my knees. "Why fight it?" he murmured, his voice like velvet, wrapping around me, squeezing the last breath from my lungs. "You know the truth now. There is no separation between us and them. The whispers are your true self, unbound by the constraints of society, of morality. They are your freedom." The words cut through me like a knife, sharp and precise. My grip on his throat weakened, my strength drained away by the weight of the truth. He was right. I could feel it deep down. The whispers were offering me something, a release from the torment, from the endless struggle. All I had to do was let go. As I knelt there, broken and defeated, the leader reached down, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch was cold, but not unpleasant. "Join us," he whispered, his voice like the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. "Embrace the darkness within. Become one with the whispers, and know peace." For a moment, I almost did. I almost surrendered, let the whispers take over completely. It would be so easy, so painless. But then, in the depths of my mind, I heard something, a faint echo, a memory of who I used to be before all of this. A memory of the person I had lost along the way. It was enough. With a final, desperate surge of willpower, I pushed back. I broke free from the leader's grip, stumbling to my feet. The whispers roared in my head, angry, vengeful, but I held on to that faint echo, that fragment of myself that refused to be lost. The leader's expression darkened, his calm composure slipping for the first time. "You think you can resist?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can fight what you truly are?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. But I turned and ran, tearing through the forest, the trees blurring into a dark smear as I fled. The whispers screamed in my mind, urging me to stop, to turn back, but I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. I didn't stop running until I was back in the town, collapsing in the middle of the deserted street, gasping for breath. The whispers were still there, clawing at the edges of my consciousness, but they were quieter now, weakened by my refusal to give in. I knew they would never fully go away. They were a part of me now, a constant shadow lurking in the background. But I had reclaimed something tonight, something they couldn't take from me, my will, my choice. As I sat there, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, I knew that the fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But for now, in this quiet moment I had won. And that was enough.